Good morning, David.
Morning, Les. How you doing?
Good, man. I'm peachy keen today.
You're what?
I'm peachy keen. You know, it's a saying. I'm kind of instead of saying chipper, I'm kind of
Peachy
peachy.
keen.
Yeah, like a
Is
peach to
that, is
bite
that,
into.
is that an abbreviated lessism?
No, it's not.
We had this weekend workshop, and these lessisms kept just flying out of them. We started to make a hobby of collecting these things. So I'm waiting for one today. We're going to get a lessism in here at some point. So, well, today our topic is on trauma. And this is a very, very serious topic because Les and I feel that the trauma is sort of the basis of most disease, both mental and physical. And we hear about the stress kills and you have a traumatic childhood. We know what's called adverse childhood experiences, which is a measurement of your childhood trauma. If you have childhood trauma, that you have heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, early mortality, suicides, depression, all sorts of stuff happen because of childhood trauma. So we tend to couch that in such type of psychological terms, and it actually isn't true exactly. Because what happens if you think of this beautiful baby, and the baby is supposed to be nurtured and safe, and as it feels nurtured and safe, it can trust other people. If the baby's in a chaotic, abusive environment, and that's all he or she knows, that's the filter that he or she has for the rest of their life. So the analogy that I use is that of a feral cat, a wild cat, compared to a domestic cat who can relax, trust, you can pet it, hold it, whatever you want to do. In a feral cat, you have a hard time even getting close to. So you can't fix a feral cat. You can't fix your brain if you're raised in a chaotic childhood. You have to reconstruct it. And that's a very deliberate step by step process. And what happens with all this work is called somatic work. You're actually changing the physical structure of your brain through what's called neuroplasticity. So Dr. Aria specializes in trauma, and I really actually will stop talking here less this morning. You're in your listening mode, I can tell. But you have this filter, and the rest of your life, the data that keeps coming in every day either reinforces it. If it reinforces the filter, great. If it doesn't reinforce your life outlook, then you reject it. It's a common marketing note fact that facts don't change things. Whatever you do in life keeps reinforcing your life output. So if you come from a very chaotic background where things are inherently are dangerous, your first thought the rest of your life is going to be, this is dangerous. So you have a hyper-reactive nervous system. And so we have the model, not the model, just the way it is. You have the way your body stays alive, the way we stay alive. So we process sensory input, it goes through the nervous system, and it sends out signals to your body to act in a way that keeps you safe. That's the output. So we've talked about dampening the output with Dr. Aria's somatic tools. But today we're going to talk about trauma. When you do trauma work, we're actually you're actually changing the physical structure of the brain and dampening this response. You go from a hyperreactive nervous system, and you may not get all the way back to calm like somebody who's raised in an incredibly nurturing environment. But that's why a average childhood or unpleasant childhood causes a lot of diseases because it changes your body's chemistry quicker. So you have a trigger happy hyperreactive nervous system. So it takes less stress to set off that reaction than somebody who generally has a trusting view of the world. And it gets worse as you get older. That's why people get sick as they get older. So this is right down Dr. Aria's alley. This is what he does. And he's been teaching me a lot about trauma. And I will now stop talking less.
Yeah, it's great. No, it's I think you've really hit several major points. Let's kind of come step back a little bit, and maybe the audience will really grasp this. There's a story behind this, what you're talking about, David, and real quickly. In between 1995 and 1997, a fellow by the name of Dr. Folletti in San Diego Kaiser Permanente was basically doing routine assessments, and after 17,000 and people, this is a preventative department, so prevention of diseases and things like that. So he was studying it. And what he found out was that he was starting to see a pattern of people with severe childhood abuse, not just sexual, physical, emotional neglect. There are about 10 domains.
Right.
And I'll give the audience a place they can go check it out. So, so we're speaking to the truth and the science of it. And long story short of this is he actually presented this, Dr. Folletti, at an obesity conference with surgeons. And they actually kind of chuckled at him and said, that's psychological, it has nothing to do with obesity. And he happened to sit next to, during the panel, he happened to sit next to the director of CDC. And the CDC director back then, this is the story, the backstory of this is basically, he says, do you really believe in that? Can I see the data? And that's how it starts. So now nationally and globally, we are now, especially at Kaiser, we're assessing is for abuse because we want to make sure that, because we have now data from Dr. Folletti. And if, for those of you who wish to kind of find out more about it, go to Dr. Google, meaning Google, type in CDC and ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and you'll get the whole study and data on what we're doing. Now, with that said, here's what we do know. We do know is when people, about a third of us in the United States have at least 1 to 2 ACE and adverse childhood experiences. That could be, we all experience divorced, when we're growing up, domestic violence, emotional abuse, neglect. Real quick comment here. You may not have had an alcoholic parent, but if your parents were not emotionally available and warm and rigid and super hyper religious to you and just very rigid, that is identical to having an alcoholic parent. Long story short of this is household abuse in general, about 10 domains of them, predicts medical problems in the future. And it also does predict something which you touched on. And then I'm going to pass it back to you, David. When we grow up with adverse childhood experiences, our nervous system, this is the key point, gets recalibrated to be in a state of defense. Why? Because the nervous system is in service of your survival. So that's why you feel this intensity and this constant fight or flight. You're trying to flee from this. And most of my patients who grew up in households and domestic violence and other things were just high stress demands, perfectionism. That is, to receive love, we try to do more and more. Long story short of this is your nervous system gets recalibrated. And what happens is your heart is tense, your body aches, your nerves. And when you have an injury, what happens is your nervous system heightens even more to protect you. So now we've got a very heightened nervous system. And long story short of this is you actually start to impact your immune system and all the other 14 bodily systems, which then you start to have like headaches and backaches and things like that. David, back to you.
So again, it's physiological. Remember, anytime you're anxious or frustrated, something in the present reminded you of something dangerous in the past. And if you know from a childhood it was dangerous in the past, and even though you're an adult and take care of yourself, your brain doesn't know that. And so it just stays hyperreactive. So we just got a couple minutes left here. So I know you have lots of, this is something we maybe be talking about intermittently for a long time this year, but give us the general approach. Let's just take today. Okay, I'm raised from a chaotic childhood. I get triggered easily. Yes, I actually did use your tool yesterday, which was just, So I think I'd like to hear you maybe just briefly present the welcoming the unwelcome. Is that what you, was that a lyricism?
Yep. It's very difficult. And what David's talking about is what we did in the workshop this weekend. Listen, let's kind of take a step back on some feedback on what you might want to do here. And I like to be very practical. You need to get a therapist, and I really mean this, whether you have chronic pain and trauma, which David and I believe overlap, right, David?
Right.
And so my recommendation to anyone who's had any sort of childhood abuse, domestic violence, just chronic life stress. And some of you might say, no, I had a great childhood, but you're perfectionistic, you're a pleaser, you get angry real easily. You might want to see someone. There is something there. And so we're not saying that people are perfectionistic or have trauma. We're saying is your nervous system is just heightened. So for those of you who do have childhood abuse trauma, what we call developmental trauma or adulthood trauma, just here's what we want you to do. Find a therapist who specializes in trauma. Here are my recommendations. Google IFS, Internal Family Systems, and find the practitioner closest to you. That's my first recommendation. Another recommendation would be to Google Somatic Experiencing, SE, that's the acronym, therapist, because they need to be certified. So one is based on Dick Schwartz's work. The other one is based on Peter Levine's work. One of these two things are really, really important. And yes, you can do EMDR and all that other stuff, but to give you a sense of guidance and structure and evidence-based treatment, I highly recommend these two for trauma. And it'll also work for chronic pain.
So again, we're talking about chronic disease right now, not just chronic pain. We're going to start
Right.
changing the conversation to chronic disease, because chronic pain is just one of many, many diagnoses. So think about, a thought hit me, not that profound, but sort of a thought. So think about the feral cat analogy. I mean, a feral cat, you can't teach yourself to be calm. I mean, think about feral cat, that somebody has to teach a cat to calm down and to learn how to trust. So if you have a very hyper life outlook, you can suppress, you can do all sorts of coping skills and feel like you're calmed down, but you have to reconstruct the nervous system. You can't really fix yourself because you can't see what's in there. So that's where it takes that outside help. So for the feral, and you had a feral cat, and you trained it, but it didn't train itself, right?
Correct. And just for everyone to know, and what David is talking about is sometimes you need to have someone who is safe and someone who has what Stephen Porges would call ventral vagal, a sense of safety. And you can, as Dana and Porges and I say, you can borrow some of mine. And so when you're with a therapist who's confident and knows what they're doing, it really will help. David is talking about a feral cat I had that would get freaked out by the sound of a door closing, and my tone of voice to it would actually calm it down. And what's intriguing about this is David and I are sending you a clear message: get the help that you need. The other thing, David, real quickly, I wanted to mention is one of my recommendations when I start working with a patient is to get him into breath work. This is Gewurtz's work.
Right.
This is
You did breath work.
Yeah, so Dr. Richard Gewurtz's work. It's very simple. And in grad school, he used to train us to breathe at least 10 minutes a day, just simple breath in, 4 breath in, 6 breath out, or 6 and 6.
Right.
6 counts, yeah. So with that said, it's called coherent breathing. And so what I do with my patients is I have them do it 5 minutes, 3 times a day for several weeks.
I know we're running over just a little bit
Yeah.
today, but this is a huge topic, but it's the core of this whole thing we're talking about. It's really a big deal. And so you want to just do one round of breath work. So I got yesterday.
Yep.
So what's my breath work I'm going to do today?
So your breath work today is, again, really emphasizing this coherent breath. So David, take a breath in, 2, 3, 4, out through your mouth, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe in this manner for the next 5 minutes, off camera, of course. And you can do that, and that will actually start to recalibrate your nervous system over a period of several weeks.
I feel rejected. You don't want to watch me breathe.
David, I don't want to watch you anything.
All right, we got to go. Sorry about going over a little bit today, but this is a big topic and there's many, many ramifications of it. So you know where you can find us. We won't go through that again today, but you're with Dynamic Healing Moments, and we'll explain someday why it's dynamic healing. It's a very dynamic interaction between your nervous system and your environment.
Yeah.
So thank you for spending some time with us today, and we hope you have a wonderful day.